Okay, so I'm going to take you through a presentation on what I think it will take to move the needle for migraine as a person living with migraine and headache disease myself. I'm going to share a little bit with you about my story and my journey with migraine, talk to you about how I think we move the needle, and share a few resources with you. So as I was thinking about how to share my personal story, I started flipping through my phone looking for photos of myself. I thought it would be helpful to pick out a couple of photos to put into the presentation. And I realized, looking at the photos, it reminded me that there's so much misperception around migraine. People think of migraine as a bad headache, and they think that this is what migraine looks like. And in fact, when you Google migraine, this is what Google showed me is migraine. It's men and women, young and old, holding onto their foreheads, wincing in pain. What migraine really looks like is this. These are all pictures of me with a migraine. I'm smiling in, I think, almost all these photos, so I look perfectly normal, but I'm in pain. I am, I guess, what's called a highly functioning person with migraine. So that means I still manage to get a lot done, even though I'm living with chronic daily attacks. And so I persevere, I go on hikes, I go to weddings, I do adventures with my friends and family. I think I'm really fortunate in that I have an incredibly supportive family, husband, and friends that all love to do a lot of really fun things. And so I have this other comorbid disease called FOMO. I don't know if you've heard of FOMO, but that's the fear of missing out. And due to my FOMO and due to the support I get from my friends and family, I'm able to carry on and be relatively productive. I was first diagnosed with migraine when I was 14 years old, so about a sophomore in high school. And for the last 9 years, I've been chronic. For those of you that don't have migraine, that means I have more than 15 days a month where I'm having migraine attacks. More recently, I'm actually what's referred to as chronic daily. So every day I have a migraine attack. I've always been one of those super compliant patients. I come into my appointments with my latest Excel spreadsheets showing my charts of how my attacks have been going. I try to read the research, keep up on what's going on, and ask a lot of questions. Like many people who have migraine, I've been through a long, arduous journey in terms of trying to find treatments that work for me. I have, again, my Excel spreadsheet that has a list of probably over 70 different treatments that I've tried. This includes, of course, not just pharmaceuticals, pills and injections, but different supplements, herbs, different devices, things I put on my head, things I put on my arm, rose-colored glasses, green lights, lifestyle changes, behavioral changes. Unfortunately, none of them have really worked for me. I was, I think, what you would describe as a difficult, frustrated patient for many years, especially around the time when I was turning chronic. But somehow I managed to turn that frustration and anger into advocacy. And I think that's been a huge, it's been a huge difference for me in terms of how I approach this disease and how I feel about living with migraine and headache disease. So as I was thinking back, there's been a couple of key turning points in my process of becoming an advocate instead of a frustrated, angry patient. In 2013, after asking so many questions in my appointments, Dr. Shapiro invited me to come to a meeting. It was the Headache Cooperative of New England's winter meeting. This is a meeting that's intended just for providers. It's not a patient meeting, but he thought I could handle listening to the information. So I went and shyly sat in the back of the room. Nobody knew who I was. I just listened to the presentations and took lots of notes. I had some really interesting learnings coming out of this that I think helped shape who I am today. In 2015, Dr. Shapiro invited me to join him in DC at Headache on the Hill. I had heard about Headache on the Hill since Dr. Shapiro is the one that founded it, and I had dreamed that I would be able to go there someday, but I didn't think I was the type of person that could go to DC along with all these doctors and speak to members of Congress. It was, blew my mind that this was finally actually happening. And this was the biggest turning point in my journey. In 2016, I got to that point where I could no longer manage working probably more than full-time, managing employees, working in an office environment. So while I had taken other short-term disability leaves, I took a long-term leave of absence for 6 months. But unfortunately, at the end of that 6 months, I wasn't necessarily better. Things hadn't changed. So while I was out on disability, I reached out to Shirley Kessel, who I had met at Headache on the Hill, and I started volunteering with Miles for Migraine. I needed something to do to feel productive, and I wanted to be involved in migraine advocacy. That volunteer role turned into a full-time position at the beginning of 2017, and again has made a significant difference in the way that I manage this disease. Also in 2017, I was offered a part-time position to help the AHDA run the annual Headache on the Hill event. So as I look back and I think about what are some of the lessons I've learned, I know there's people on this call today who are just starting out in their journey with migraine. There's people who've had migraine for 40 years, and there's people that don't have migraine at all. I thought it would be helpful to share some of the key learnings that I've had and hope that I can pass those on and maybe expedite the amount of time it takes somebody else to reach similar conclusions. Maybe these will resonate with you. There's no cure for migraine and treatments are limited. I know I was told this from the beginning, but it's one of the hardest things to really understand and to accept, that no matter how many times you try different things, these treatments, up until probably the last year and a half, there was very few treatments that were actually developed specifically for migraine. The treatments come with a lot of side effects, and understanding that there's no cure can be really hard to accept. We need to have advocates on our side, but we also need to learn to advocate for ourselves. So it's important that you have friends or family that are willing to help you identify when you need help or make a phone call on your behalf when you're not able to do it. But it's equally important to be able to do that for yourself as much as possible. We need to learn to be we are our own best advocates. Expectation setting is so important, both on the side of the patient and the provider. I think in hindsight, if I had clearer expectations about what to expect early in my journey, it would have reduced a lot of the anxiety and frustration that I had. I went through a period of calling my provider's office fairly regularly because I was in excruciating pain and I just wanted something to help. Now I understand that there's really not much point in calling because there's not anything that they can give me that's going to break this cycle. I just have to ride it out and know that it will get better. Providers are just as frustrated by the lack of treatments. This was something I learned at that Hackney meeting. I think a lot of times we forget that our headache specialists or our providers are human too. And many of them are dealing with migraine themselves, and they just want us to feel better. And I wish more people understood how hard our providers work to try to get us better treatments. Advocacy is not somebody else's job. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people with migraine say, I'm too sick, I don't know how to advocate. That's somebody else's job. Why doesn't my provider, why isn't there more research? My provider should be working on that. But that's not the case. There's 564 headache specialists in the United States. There's 47 million people with migraine. Those of us who have this disease have to speak up because our voices will be louder and we can get more done. And finally, I've learned that it's better to participate and pay the price than to miss out and still pay the price. So what I mean by this is, you know, there's so many times with migraine where my friends would go hiking or go for a bike ride or go on a trip, and I would stay home on the couch, and I would be not only in pain from the migraine, but deal with the emotional pain of missing out on all these life's adventures. So I decided a while back that as much as humanly possible, even if I'm having an attack, I want to go and be a part of those events. And that's what you saw in all those photos there. It might mean that I deal with more severe attack afterwards and that I spend days on the couch or in bed following it, but that's worth it to me in order to continue to take part. So how do we move the needle? I think we move the needle through advocacy. Now, one of the things that's scary about advocacy is it has so many different definitions, and I think a lot of people think advocacy means going to Headache on the Hill. And that is a form of advocacy, but it's not the only way. Advocacy starts with self-advocacy, self-care, that whole concept of securing your own oxygen mask before assisting others, taking the time to relax and take care of yourself. Being able to ask questions and asserting what your needs and rights are. Speaking up for yourself and what you need, when you need help, accepting help, and educating yourself. There's so many ways to do that these days through blogs, websites, newsletters, Google alerts, whatever it is. Immerse yourself in information so you can become more educated. At the next level, we start talking about individual advocacy. So this is where you start speaking out. You share your diagnosis. You let other people know what you're living with. Maybe it's wearing a shirt. I can't tell you how many times I've had my Miles for Migraine shirt on, either on a hiking trail or in a grocery store, and somebody has stopped me to ask what this is. And it turns out they have migraine or they know somebody with migraine. It's a great way to open the conversation. Share that knowledge that you've learned and help other people become more knowledgeable about the disease. Maybe you write a letter or start a blog. Telling your story is an important piece of advocacy. And then at kind of the next level, we get to systems advocacy. So this is where we're trying to change policies. You might do that by simply signing a petition, which is something you can do from home. Or you may connect with your legislators or members of Congress. Your ability to meet these people face to face and put a face to migraine and help them, they'll remember your story and keep you in mind as they work on policies in the future. And at the highest level of advocacy, you get involved with changing laws and policies, as Dr. Shapiro explained. My experience kind of coming into advocacy, I think of two people specifically who had a large impact on me. One is my mom. She was the first person to teach me that, you know, I needed to speak up when I didn't feel like I was getting the care I needed, that wasn't okay, and that there's ways to do that in a positive way that's not going to cause more trouble. The other was through my headache specialist. I think a lot of people think of their doctors as just being in charge of writing prescriptions. But knowing that Dr. Shapiro was responsible for my patient care and also had a strong interest in research and was very involved in advocacy became really interesting to me. I started asking him a lot more questions about the latest research and his advocacy goals than I did about the next prescription he was going to write for me. And I think probably the best prescription he's given me is that of being involved in advocacy. that's had the most impact on my ability to live with migraine. Headache on the Hill, of course, was a life changer for me. This was the first time that I was in a place where both patients and providers were together working towards this common goal. It was also the first time I was in a place where there were so many other people who had migraine. And you don't have to go to Headache on the Hill for that. That's why we have Miles for Migraine today, so that there are in-person events where people can come together and meet other people who are going through similar situations. Of course, I'm a little biased because I work for Miles for Migraine, but I think this is a great organization that offers all types of events that you can get involved in. And through the Miles for Migraine events, we discuss stigma and advocacy and provide resources for you to help grow yourself as an advocate. Why do I think advocacy is the path forward? It gives you purpose when you have a disease. It connects you to people who have common interests, lessens the feelings of isolation. And the more we all talk about this disease, the more people will understand and the less stigma there will be. So in wrapping up, I just want to share a couple of resources with you. I think similar to the spectrum of migraine disease and the spectrum of advocacy, there's a spectrum of resources. For somebody who is newly diagnosed, the CHAMP website is an incredible resource. CHAMP is a coalition of multiple migraine and headache organizations and bloggers. They have access guides if you're having trouble getting treatments. They kind of bring together all the information of the different organizations. When you're ready to start coming out in person and getting involved in events, Miles for Migraine is your go-to resource. And then when you think you might be ready, if and when you think you might be ready for that next level of advocacy, the AHDA is the place to go. As much as possible, especially, I mean, this is also a lot pre-COVID, but as much as you can get out to in-person events versus just being on social media, I would really encourage that. So here's a list of many of the migraine nonprofit organizations and bloggers that may be good resources for you. And with that, I will take a couple of questions. Let's see. All right, so I imagine with no cure and several ineffective treatments, migraine must chip away at the mental health of its sufferers. Do you recommend any strategies to address the psychological frustration versus the physiological symptoms? Absolutely. I think, therapy is important for people who are living with migraine disease. Having somebody to talk to who understands what living in pain is all about. I found cognitive behavioral therapy to be really helpful, just in terms of being able to redirect some of my thoughts and hopefully get myself out of that rabbit hole that I would head down when I really hadn't been feeling well for a long period of time. Connecting with other people that have migraine is also another way to help deal with the emotional aspects. Let's see. Are there any centralized resources to find groups to volunteer with outside of Vermont? Yes. So I would recommend either the CHAMP website, or there is the Association of Migraine Disorders has a central volunteer database where if you're interested in volunteering with any of the migraine nonprofits, go to the AMD's website and sign up for the volunteer registry. And all of the migraine nonprofits check that when we're looking for resources for different projects. Let's see. Do I think the language of illness versus disease when referring to headache disorders impacts funding? Disease is associated with a cure, where illness with management. The language does make a difference. There is a lot of stigma around migraine and headache disease, whether we call it migraine and headache illness or migraine and headache disease. Unfortunately, the perception is that migraine is a bad headache and everybody gets a headache at some point in their life. So until we can break down that stigma and help people to really understand what this disease does to people and how disabling it is, we're going to continue to fight these battles for funding. I do believe we're making progress though, and we're going to continue to make more progress. All right. I think that's it for right now. If I missed any, I'm going to circle back with people directly. But I think that's it. I don't know, Helen, how are we doing on time? I think it's time to take a quick break. And so what we're gonna do, sorry, I'm looking at my chats and my cell phone. Too many
about that. I was on mute. You can take one more came in, a question about tools for increasing assertiveness when working with medical professionals. Maybe you want to take that one and then we can break for our virtual break.
Yes, tools for increasing assertiveness. I don't have a specific answer for that. I think it comes from experience, education. The more you educate yourself so that you feel more confident in what you believe, then I think that's helpful. I think it's important that whether you feel that you have enough education or not, that you know, one of the things I talked about in advocacy is asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think a lot of us tend to take what our providers say as, you know, gospel. Like, well, if they told me, then that's got to be the way it is. It's okay to say to a provider when they prescribe you a medication that that's too expensive for you. You're not going to be able to use that treatment, or to say, you know, if I have to take that pill every day, I'm unlikely to remember to do that. I should, you know, I'm going to be honest and say, I don't think that's going to work. Or if it's, you know, maybe it's a nasal spray and you just can't imagine putting something up your nose, say that. It's okay to speak up. I think, you know, I'll think more if there's any other specific resources, but those are my initial tips.
I can chime in a bit. I agree completely with what you said, Katie. There's a, pardon me, there's a way of looking at how people approach their disease. And am I still there?
Yes.
I've blanked out somehow. All right. Anyway, that psychologists talk about in terms of what's called the locus of control. So what does this mean? This means the degree to which you see your medical problem or your existence at all having agency in doing it rather than it being happening to you. And there's a spectrum in this, and everybody exists somewhere on the spectrum. You know, some people think that they can control everything, which is inappropriate, and others feel that they can't control anything, and that's inappropriate. But the closer you are to approaching your problem, that you actually have agency in this, the more likely it is that you will actually gain progress in terms of your disease, and certainly in terms of how you interact with your healthcare provider. So people who listen to what's requested in terms of their provider, in terms of providing information, completing information forms, you know, going the extra yard to make sure that medical notes or studies that are relevant are available and supplied to the provider when the provider is asking for it, and listening to what the options are that are presented. Those are very valuable approaches in terms of being able to make progress about this. And people who come in and say, heal me, you know, you can get the notes from my other doctor, the referring doctor, and don't see this as a partnership, are actually less likely to gain progress with their disease. And it's not just migraine, it's across the board that this is really an essential part of self-advocacy, as Katie is describing. You need to believe that what you do has meaning and importance, and that your healthcare provider is actually your partner, that you're both working on a problem, and that when you go to the doctor and the doctor says this isn't going to work, getting angry at the doctor is misplacing the anger, because the anger is shared between, to some extent, between you and your doctor at the disease. Never let your disease get between you and your doctor. You know, you and your doctor are working on this together to try to help with this. So
I think those are all great points, Bob. And I think another important one is, if you have a doctor that it's just not working well between you and that doctor, there's people that don't work well together, and you try, but don't be afraid to move on. Try another. There's not a ton, but there are other headache specialists out there. Somebody made a comment here that their doctor told them there's not much that can be done for them. And I think, sometimes we have to be careful about how we're hearing that message. I hear a lot of people say, my doctor said there's no more options for me. There's always more options. More options might mean seeing a different provider. It might mean seeing other types of providers besides a headache specialist. It might mean, doing therapy or getting involved in like some of the modalities we're going to share with you this afternoon, yoga or art therapy, or finding other outlets to manage your pain. But you are in control, and you need to make the decision if it's not the right fit between you and that provider.
all true.
All right, there's one other question I want to quickly address. Is somebody said that they're already a strong lifetime advocate for themselves and want to consider going to the next level. Where should they begin? I think coming to some Miles for Migraine events, and if you want to be more involved, signing up to volunteer with an organization like Miles for Migraine, or through that AM Association of Migraine Disorders volunteer portal. If Headache on the Hill is something you're interested in, please reach out to me, and I'll have a conversation with you and see if it sounds like it's a good fit for you. All right, so we are going to take a quick break. We know it's exhausting to stare at a screen for too long, so we're going to sign off briefly, and we're going to come back at, is it 12:10, Helen? So in about 8 minutes. So you have a little time to go grab a snack, drink of water. We hope you'll come back. Coming up next, we have a session on CBD and medical marijuana. And then we'll have our art therapy and yoga. And when you come back, so you're going to sign off this link. And when you come back, you're going to use the second link that we sent to you, and we'll all join back together at that time. Thank you so much. We'll see you shortly.